I stood in my husband's home office holding the partnership agreement that would ultimately destroy my 32-year marriage at the exact moment I heard his car pull into the driveway. And before I go any further, I should introduce myself properly, because this is my story and I know some of you listening may recognize pieces of your own lives in it. My name is Vivian Clark, and as you read this, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. So drop your city or state in the comments, because everything I'm about to tell you began with one ordinary Thursday afternoon in October. The day a single blue folder changed everything. Richard had been acting strange for months by then, taking secretive phone calls he'd leave the room for, attending weekend business meetings, and suddenly insisting on working from the downtown office instead of from home. And that morning, he rushed out so frantically that he forgot his laptop, then called me in a panic asking me to find a blue folder on his desk and scan the documents inside to his email. And I found the folder easily because it was clearly labeled Partnership Restructuring. But the moment I opened it, my hands began to shake, because inside were legal documents, financial statements, and a partnership agreement dated 3 weeks earlier that transferred 40% of Clark Industries, the company my inheritance had helped build, not to an employee, not to an investor, but as a gift to someone named Vanessa Torres. A transfer of marital assets worth over $4 million to a 29-year-old woman I had never even heard of. And tucked alongside those papers were printed emails, dozens of them, messages that read like this: "Baby, once the paperwork clears, we can finally be together, openly, and, Richard, you promised me half, not 40%, followed by his reply: "V, be patient. The old woman doesn't understand business anyway. She won't even know what she's signing when the time comes." And reading those words, the old woman, that's what he called me. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, because I was 63 years old and my husband of 3 decades had reduced me to that. And still, I didn't cry, not yet, because hidden behind those partnership papers was something else. Photographs of Richard and this Vanessa woman together on a beach in Mexico, at a restaurant I recognized from a business dinner he'd attended 2 months earlier, and standing in front of a condo building with a sold sign where she held up a key. And as I stared at those images, I heard Richard's voice echoing in my head from a family dinner just 3 weeks earlier, when his brother had asked me about the company's expansion plans. And before I could even answer, Richard laughed and said, "Don't bother asking Vivian about business. She's too old to understand these complicated financial structures. Stick to your gardening, honey." And everyone laughed, even his mother, while I smiled and brushed it off and told myself he was joking, even though he wasn't joking at all. He was laying the groundwork, making sure everyone saw me as incompetent, outdated, irrelevant, preparing to erase me completely. And when I heard his car door slam, I knew he'd be inside in 30 seconds. So I quickly took photos of every document with my phone, replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, and walked downstairs. And when Richard rushed in, I handed him the blue folder with a pleasant smile and said, "Here you go, sweetheart." I didn't look inside. You know, I don't understand all that business stuff anyway. And he kissed my cheek in relief and told me, "You're the best, Viv. I don't know what I'd do without you." And I watched him leave, still smiling, knowing he had no idea what I'd just discovered and no idea what was coming. And that night, as Richard slept soundly beside me, snoring like he didn't have a care in the world, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of the bedroom we'd shared for 32 years and forced myself to think clearly, because panic wouldn't help me and rage wouldn't help me, and I needed to be strategic, which meant understanding how we'd gotten here in the first place. Back to 1991, when Richard and I met, when I was 31 and working as a financial analyst and he was 30, ambitious and running a small manufacturing consultancy out of a rented office space. When we married within a year, and he called me brilliant and told me my mind for numbers was exactly what he needed. When my father passed away in 1994 and left me $800,000, and Richard came to me with a proposal to invest it in expanding his consultancy into full-scale operations so we could build something together, a legacy, our future. And I believed him, becoming his partner not just in marriage but in business, as Clark Ministries was born from my inheritance and his vision, with me handling finances and him managing operations. And for 15 years we built that company together without children by choice, making the business everything to us. Until in 2009, Richard began talking about modern business practices and told me having his wife as CFO looked unprofessional and that he wanted to bring in outside talent, real professionals, making me feel like I was holding him back and that my contributions weren't enough anymore. So I stepped back and trusted him and signed the papers, making him CEO with full operational control while keeping only my ownership stake. My first mistake. And over the next 14 years, I watched from the sidelines as he turned our company into a $20 million enterprise, hiring new executives, expanding into 3 states, winning industry awards, introducing me at company events only as his wife while everyone else had titles. And at home he stopped asking my opinion about business, stopped discussing finances entirely, telling me whenever I questioned anything that I wouldn't understand the complexities and that it was different now because they were playing in the big leagues. And I told myself he was stressed because building an empire was hard. So I focused on our home and our social life and supporting his career quietly, proud of what we'd built while his family reinforced the narrative. His brother calling me the trophy wife who got lucky, and his mother suggesting I take up hobbies or volunteer work to fill my time now that Richard didn't need my help anymore. They treated me like I'd been some secretary Richard married out of kindness, not the woman whose money and mind had launched his entire career. And slowly, I started believing it too. Started thinking maybe I really didn't understand modern business. Maybe I was out of touch, too old to grasp the sophisticated strategies Richard employed now. And that was exactly what he wanted, because he needed me to believe I was incompetent, irrelevant, easily dismissed. Since you can't steal from someone who's watching carefully, and you can only steal from someone who's been convinced they're too stupid to notice. But finding those papers woke something up in me, something I'd forgotten I had, because I wasn't incompetent. I was a financial analyst who'd built a multi-million-dollar company, and Richard had made a fatal error by underestimating me. So on Friday morning I did something I hadn't done in years and got dressed in my best business suit, the navy Armani I'd bought for our 20th anniversary and barely worn, put on the pearl earrings my father gave me, and drove to Clark Industries while Richard thought I was heading to my book club and barely looked up from his phone when I kissed him goodbye. And when I arrived, the receptionist looked surprised and said, "Mrs. Clark, we weren't expecting you." And I replied smoothly that I was there to see David Chen in accounting and just needed to discuss some personal financial planning, because David had been with us since 2003 and had always been loyal and thorough. And his office was on the 3rd floor, where his eyes widened when I walked in, and he said, "Vivian, it's been ages. What brings you here?" And I closed the door behind me and told him I needed him to print something for me. Complete financial records for Clark Industries for the past 3 years' revenue, expenses, payroll, asset transfers, everything. And he hesitated and said Richard usually handled requests like that personally. So I asked him who signed his paycheck, and when he said technically Clark Industries, I asked who owned 51% of Clark Industries. And his expression shifted, because we'd always had a good relationship and he knew the company's history. And when he acknowledged that I did, I told him that as majority shareholder I was requesting access to my own company's financial records unless there was a reason I shouldn't see them. And 20 minutes later I walked out with 3 years of financial statements on a flash drive and a promise from David that the conversation would remain between us. Then I spent Friday night in a hotel room going through everything while Richard thought I was visiting my sister in Connecticut, ordering room service, spreading papers across the bed, and working the way I used to work, methodically, carefully, following every dollar, only to discover that what I found was worse than I'd imagined, because Vanessa Torres wasn't just Richard's mistress but had been on the payroll for 18 months as a business development consultant, earning $25,000 a month, receiving over $400,000 in the past year alone in consulting fees, bonuses, and expense reimbursements, all from our company and our assets. And it went deeper still, because Richard had created an LLC 6 months earlier called RV Ventures, used Clark Industries funds to purchase the condo I'd seen in those photos as a so-called business investment property, bought a BMW registered to that LLC, and transferred another $200,000 into the RV Ventures account. Just last month, RV for Richard and Vanessa systematically moving marital assets and company resources, everything we'd built together, into accounts and properties with her name attached, making it clear that the partnership agreement I'd found wasn't the beginning but the culmination. Because once I signed those papers, he clearly planned to trick me into signing. She'd legally owned 40% of everything, and combined with what he'd already given her, they'd effectively controlled the company together. And then I found the divorce papers drafted but not filed and hidden in a digital folder labeled 2024 Tax Planning, revealing he planned to divorce me only after the partnership transfer was complete and enough assets had been moved that I'd have no legal recourse, offering me maybe $2 million from a company worth $20 million that I'd funded and helped build. And I sat in that hotel room until 3 in the morning, staring at the evidence of my husband's betrayal before opening my phone and starting to make calls. So that Monday morning, I was sitting in the office of Patricia Morrison, the best divorce attorney in the state, recommended by a friend who'd endured a messy separation 5 years earlier, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a reputation for destroying unfaithful husbands in court. And I laid everything out for her: the photos, the financial statements, the partnership agreements, the divorce papers he'd drafted, while she read silently with an unchanged expression until she finally looked up and said, "Mrs. Clark, your husband is an idiot," which almost made me laugh until she explained that he'd committed about 7 different kinds of fraud, including misappropriation of marital assets, corporate fraud, and potentially tax fraud depending on how he reported the transfers, and that he'd documented everything, calling it a prosecutor's dream. And when I told her I wanted to stop him before he could transfer anything else or complete the partnership agreement, she leaned forward and said, "Here's what we're going to do," explaining that first she'd file an emergency motion that very day to freeze all joint accounts, all company accounts, everything, citing suspected fraud and misappropriation of marital assets, and that the judge would grant it because the evidence was overwhelming. "Won't that alert Richard that I know?" "Oh, absolutely. He'll know by 5 o'clock today, but by then, he won't be able to move a single dollar anywhere. He'll be trapped." She smiled, and it wasn't kind. "Second, we're going to contact the IRS. These transfers he's made, if he hasn't reported them properly, and I'm guessing he hasn't, we're looking at tax evasion. The IRS takes that seriously." How seriously? Criminal charges? Seriously? Prison time? Seriously? My heart pounded. This was real. This wasn't just divorce. This was nuclear. "Third," Patricia continued, "we're going to file a lawsuit against both him and Vanessa Torres for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. As majority shareholder, you have every right to sue over unauthorized transfers of company assets. We'll tie them both up in litigation for years. Even if they try to fight, the legal fees alone will bankrupt them. And the company, you're the majority owner. Once we prove fraud, a court can invalidate all these transfers. You'll get back your 40%. You'll maintain control. And if we play this right, we can force Richard out entirely for violating his fiduciary duties as CEO." I thought about Richard sleeping peacefully beside me every night, kissing me goodbye every morning, calling me honey and sweetheart, while secretly dismantling my entire life. I thought about Vanessa Torres, young and smug, thinking she'd won some prize. "Do it," I said. "All of it today." Patricia nodded. "I need you to do something for me though. Go home, act completely normal. Don't let him suspect anything until the papers are served." "Can you do that?" I'd spent 14 years being dismissed, underestimated, treated like I was incompetent. I'd become very good at playing a role. "I can do that," I said. That afternoon, I went home and made Richard's favorite dinner, pot roast with roasted vegetables. I set the table with candles. When he came home at 7, I greeted him with a smile and a kiss. "You're in a good mood," he said, surprised. "I just love you," I told him. "I'm grateful for everything you've built for us." He hugged me, and I felt his relief. He thought he'd gotten away with it. He had no idea the bomb was already ticking. The explosion happened on Wednesday morning at 9:47 a.m. I was in the kitchen pretending to read a magazine when Richard's phone started ringing. He was in the shower. It rang 4 times, then stopped, then immediately started ringing again. Then his office phone. Then someone was pounding on our front door. I opened it to find a process server with a stack of papers. "Mrs. Vivian Clark." "Yes, you've been served." He handed me copies of the emergency motions Patricia had filed. Then he looked at his clipboard. "Is Richard Clark home?" "He's in the shower. I'll wait." Richard came downstairs 5 minutes later, hair wet, confused by the strange car in our driveway. The process server handed him his papers. "Mr. Clark, you've been served with emergency motions to freeze all assets associated with Clark Industries, and your personal accounts, along with a lawsuit for fraud and misappropriation of marital assets. I watched the color drain from Richard's face as he read. His hands started shaking. He looked at me and I saw the moment he understood. Vivian, I found the partnership agreement, I said calmly, and the financial statements and the condo you bought for Vanessa and the divorce papers you drafted. I found everything, Richard. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. The process server left. Richard stood in our foyer, papers in his hand, staring at me like I was a stranger. You went through my office. You asked me to get papers from your office. Remember, you were so careless. I poured myself coffee, my hands steady. The accounts are frozen. Richard, every single account, joint accounts, company accounts, that secret LLC you created, all of it. You can't move a single dollar anywhere. You can't do this. His voice rose, panic, replacing shock. That company is mine. I built it with my money, and as a majority shareholder, I absolutely can do this. In fact, I already did. I took a sip of coffee. Oh, and there's more. The IRS received an anonymous tip yesterday about potential tax fraud related to unreported asset transfers. They're very interested in those $400,000 in consulting fees you paid Vanessa. Funny thing, she never reported that income on her taxes either. His face went white. The IRS, apparently, they take tax evasion quite seriously. Something about criminal charges. I tilted my head, pretending to remember. Patricia explained it to me. But you know me, I'm too old to understand complicated business matters. He grabbed my arm. Vivian, wait, let's talk about this. We can work something out. I pulled away. There's nothing to work out. You made your choices. You called me too old to understand. You laughed about it with your family. You planned to steal everything I helped build and divorce me with barely anything. Well, now you understand something. Richard, I understand business perfectly. I always did. His phone rang. Then his office line, then his cell again. His attorney, probably the bank, maybe Vanessa, wondering why her accounts were suddenly frozen, too. You need to leave, I said. Patricia filed a motion for exclusive use of the marital home. The judge granted it an hour ago. You're no longer welcome here. This is my house. No, Richard, this is my house. Everything is my house. You just forgot that for a while. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story and want to see more content like this, please hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. Richard grabbed his keys and left, still in shock. I watched him drive away, his phone pressed to his ear. The war had begun. The next 72 hours were chaos. Richard called 47 times. I didn't answer. His attorney called. I referred them to Patricia. His mother called screaming about how I was destroying the family. I hung up. On Thursday afternoon, Patricia called with news. The IRS moved fast. They've opened a full investigation into Clark Industries' financial records for the past 5 years. They want everything. Payroll records, expense reports, asset transfers, all of it. What did they find? In the past 18 months alone, Richard failed to report over $600,000 in personal use of company funds. The condo, the car, Vanessa's salary, none of it was properly documented or taxed. He classified it all as business expenses, which is textbook tax fraud. I felt a grim satisfaction. What happens now? The IRS will finish their investigation. If they find what we think they'll find, Richard is looking at criminal charges. We're talking potential prison time, massive fines, penalties, and here's the beautiful part. Any assets he's hidden will be seized to cover what he owes. Friday morning, I received an email from David in accounting. Subject line, you should see this. He'd forwarded me an email chain from Richard to Vanessa sent at 2 a.m. Thursday night. Richard must have been desperate enough to use his company email, forgetting David had access to everything. Everything is frozen. She knows about us. She's contacted the IRS. We need to move whatever we can quickly. Do you still have access to the RV Ventures account? Vanessa's response, are you kidding me? I can't access anything. You said this was foolproof. You said she was too stupid to figure it out. You promised me half of everything, Richard, half, and now I'm being investigated for tax fraud. My accounts are frozen. Fix this. Richard's next email. I'm working on it. My attorney says we might be able to fight this if we claim the partnership was legitimate business restructuring. We need to get our story straight. Meet me at the office tonight. Don't come to the house. She's got it locked down. I forwarded everything to Patricia with a simple note. They're panicking. Her response came back in seconds. Beautiful. Let them panic. Panicked people make mistakes. Saturday afternoon, Richard showed up at the house despite the court order. I saw him through the window looking disheveled. 3 days of stubble on his face. He'd been staying at a hotel. Apparently, I didn't answer the door. He knocked for 10 minutes. Then he started shouting, "Vivian, please, we need to talk. I made mistakes, okay? But we can fix this. Don't destroy everything we built." I called the police. They arrived within minutes, explained the court order to Richard, and escorted him from the property. He looked at me through the window as they walked him to his car, and I saw something I'd never seen before in 32 years of marriage: fear. Sunday morning, Patricia called again. "Vivian, I need to prepare you for something." The IRS investigation expanded. They found evidence that Richard has been skimming from company profits for years, hiding it in offshore accounts. We're not talking about $600,000 anymore. We're talking about potentially $3 million in unreported income and tax liability. I sat down heavily. $3 million. He's been doing this for at least 8 years, long before Vanessa. He's been systematically stealing from the company, from you, and hiding the money. The IRS is furious. They're talking about criminal prosecution. "Vivian, this isn't just divorce court anymore. This is federal crime territory." "Good," I said quietly. "Let them prosecute." Monday afternoon, I was reviewing documents in the study when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a silver Lexus in the driveway, not Richard's car. I opened the door to find a young woman standing on my porch. She was petite, blonde, attractive in that carefully maintained way that takes money. Designer purse, expensive shoes. This had to be Vanessa Torres. "Can I help you?" I asked coldly. "Mrs. Clark, I'm Vanessa. I think we need to talk." The audacity, the absolute audacity of this woman to come to my home. "No, we don't. You need to leave my property immediately. Please." She held up her hands. "Just 5 minutes. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to tell you the truth." Something in her tone made me pause. She looked scared, exhausted. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the circles under her eyes. "The truth. That's interesting considering you've been sleeping with my husband for 2 years. 18 months. She corrected automatically, then flushed. "Look, I know how this looks. I know what you think of me, but Richard lied to both of us. I'm giving you 3 minutes. Talk." She glanced around nervously. "Can I come in? I don't want to do this on your porch." Against my better judgment, I let her into the foyer. Not the living room, not the kitchen, just the entryway where I could easily throw her out. Vanessa took a breath. "Richard told me you two were separated. He said you'd grown apart, that you were basically roommates at this point, waiting for the right time to divorce. He said you didn't care about the business anymore, that you'd checked out years ago, and you believed him." He was convincing. Her voice cracked. "He showed me separate bedrooms at his apartment. I didn't know it was a hotel room he'd staged. He told me about how you'd retired from business, how you preferred your social circles to actually working. He made it sound like the marriage was already over in everything but paperwork. So, you helped him steal $4 million from me." I didn't know it was stealing. He said the partnership was legitimate business restructuring. He showed me projections, told me I'd earned my place in the company through my consulting work. I thought I was actually helping grow the business. She was crying now, mascara streaking. "Then the IRS showed up at my apartment. Then my accounts got frozen. Then Richard finally admitted the truth, that you're not separated, that you didn't know about any of this, that he'd forged documents and lied to everyone. Why are you telling me this?" She wiped her eyes. "Because I'm 29 years old and I'm facing tax fraud charges. My attorney says I could go to prison because Richard didn't report the money he paid me. He set me up. He used me to steal from you and then left me holding the bag when everything collapsed." I studied her. She looked genuinely terrified. "What do you want from me?" "I want to testify against Richard. I'll tell prosecutors everything. Every lie he told, every document he forged, every conversation we had about hiding money from you. I'll give them everything if it helps reduce my charges." "You want to make a deal." "I want to survive this." She met my eyes. "Richard destroyed both our lives. The difference is, you're fighting back. I just want a chance to do the same." I thought about it for a long moment. Then I called Patricia. Patricia arranged for Vanessa to meet with the IRS investigators and the district attorney's office that same evening. I didn't attend. Patricia said it was better if I wasn't there. But she called me afterward with an update. Vanessa gave them everything. Patricia said, and I mean everything. Emails, text messages, recordings of phone conversations where Richard explicitly discussed hiding assets from you. She even had copies of documents he'd forged, partnership agreements he'd backdated, financial statements he'd altered. The DA is building a criminal case, Vivon. This goes beyond divorce court. Now, what kind of charges? Tax fraud, wire fraud, forgery, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. We're looking at potentially 15 to 20 years in federal prison if he's convicted on all counts. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. What happens to Vanessa? The DA is offering her immunity in exchange for her testimony. She avoid criminal charges, though she have to pay back taxes on the income Richard gave her. She's cooperating fully. Tuesday morning, Richard's attorney called Patricia, desperate to negotiate. Richard wanted to settle. He'd agree to whatever terms I wanted if I'd just make the criminal investigation go away. Patricia laughed when she told me. I explained to them that you don't control the IRS or the district attorney. This isn't civil court anymore. The federal government is prosecuting him, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, even if you wanted to. Do I want to? I asked quietly. She paused. That's up to you, Vivian. You could potentially ask the DA to consider leniency if Richard cooperates and returns all the stolen assets. But honestly, he doesn't deserve leniency. She was right. He didn't. Wednesday afternoon, the DA's office filed formal charges: tax fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, forgery. The news spread quickly. By evening, it was all over the local business community. Clark Industries CEO arrested for defrauding his own wife. The company's stock we'd gone public 2 years earlier. Another decision Richard made without consulting me dropped 30%. Richard's family finally reached out, not to apologize, to blame me. His brother called me a vindictive woman who was destroying a good man over a simple affair. His mother said I was selfish, that I should think about the family's reputation. His sister suggested I was too emotional and should handle this privately. I hung up on all of them. Thursday morning, I drove to Clark Industries for the second time in 14 years. This time, I wasn't sneaking around. I was the majority shareholder walking into my own company. The receptionist looked nervous. Mrs. Clark, we weren't expecting. I'm calling an emergency board meeting, I said. Conference room, 1 hour, all board members, all department heads, mandatory attendance. She scrambled to make calls. I took the elevator to the executive floor, Richard's floor, and walked into the CEO's office. It was exactly as he'd left it Monday morning before his world collapsed. Coffee cups still on the desk, papers scattered everywhere, photos of us on the shelf, lies preserved in silver frames. I sat in his chair and waited. When the board members filed in an hour later, they looked uncertain, scared. They should be. Half of them had helped Richard sideline me over the years, dismissing my questions, treating me like an irrelevant trophy wife. I stood at the head of the table. Gentlemen, ladies, let me reintroduce myself. I'm Vivian Clark, majority shareholder and founder of this company, and things are about to change. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. I laid out everything: Richard's fraud, the embezzlement, the IRS investigation, the criminal charges. I showed them the financial statements David had pulled, the evidence of money being systematically stolen from company accounts. Several board members looked genuinely shocked. Others looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. They'd known something was wrong. They'd just chosen not to ask questions. As of today, I announced, I'm assuming the role of interim CEO. Richard Clark is suspended from all duties, pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. I'm initiating a complete financial audit of the past 10 years. Anyone who participated in or had knowledge of fraudulent activities has one opportunity to come forward voluntarily. After today, cooperation will not be met with leniency. David Chen spoke up. Vivian, I want you to know I had no idea about the offshore accounts or the embezzlement. When you asked for those records, that was the first time I'd looked at the overall picture. I should have noticed sooner. David, you're not under suspicion, but I need you to work with the auditors. Complete transparency. If you find anything questionable, anything at all, report it immediately. 2 board members resigned that afternoon. Good riddance. The rest fell in line quickly, once they understood the alternative was potential legal liability. Over the next 2 weeks, the full scope of Richard's betrayal came to light. The forensic accountants I'd hired found over $4 million in hidden assets, offshore accounts, shell companies, properties registered under false names. He'd been stealing from Clark Industries for a decade. Long before Vanessa, using increasingly sophisticated schemes to hide the money. The criminal trial began in early December. I attended every day, sitting in the front row where Richard couldn't avoid seeing me. Vanessa testified first, describing in detail how Richard had manipulated her, used her to facilitate his fraud, and promised her a future built on stolen money. The prosecution called witnesses who testified about forged documents, altered financial statements, false tax returns. Richard's defense attorney tried to paint him as a successful businessman who'd made accounting errors and poor judgment calls regarding personal relationships. The jury wasn't buying it. On December 18th, after 3 days of deliberation, they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts: tax fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, forgery. The judge scheduled sentencing for January. Richard's mother approached me outside the courtroom. "Are you happy now? You've destroyed him. Destroyed our whole family." I looked at her calmly. Richard destroyed himself. He stole from me. He lied to me. He tried to erase me from the life we built together. I simply refused to disappear quietly. "He loved you," she said, crying. "No," I corrected. "He loved what I gave him. My money, my trust, my willingness to be invisible. The moment I stopped being useful, I became an obstacle to remove." I picked up my purse. Richard never loved me. He loved what he could take from me. In January, Richard was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $4.2 million in restitution plus penalties. The judge noted his sophisticated and prolonged scheme to defraud and his complete lack of remorse. Vanessa avoided prison but received 5 years probation and had to repay $200,000 in back taxes. Her career in business was essentially over. Richard's assets, everything he'd hidden, were seized and returned to Clark Industries. To me, I got everything back. Every dollar he'd stolen, every property he'd bought, every account he'd hidden, all of it. The divorce was finalized in February. Richard signed the papers from prison. He had no choice. He had no money for attorneys anymore, no assets to fight over. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed 32 years ago protected what little he had left, which was essentially nothing. I walked out of the courthouse with full ownership of Clark Industries, the house, all our legitimate assets, and a court order preventing Richard from ever contacting me again. Patricia walked beside me, smiling. "How does it feel?" "Expensive," I said honestly. The legal fees had been astronomical. The company had suffered reputation damage. The stress had taken years off my life, but I was free, and I had my company back. The next month, I spent restructuring Clark Industries from the ground up. I brought in new board members, people who actually respected my business acumen. I promoted David Chen to CFO. I implemented new financial controls and oversight mechanisms to prevent anyone from ever stealing from the company again. I also started showing up at the office regularly, taking meetings, making decisions. The staff was nervous at first. They'd been taught to see me as irrelevant. But I'd spent 32 years watching Richard run this company. I knew every operation, every client, every strategy. I'd just been told I was too old to understand it. Turned out I understood it perfectly. By April, Clark Industries stock had recovered. We'd weathered the scandal. Several clients who'd left came back, impressed by the swift action and complete transparency we'd shown during the investigation. I hired 3 new executives, all women over 50 who'd been told they were too old for leadership positions elsewhere. We made an excellent team. One afternoon in May, I was in my office, Richard's old office now redecorated, when David knocked on my door. "Vivan, there's someone here to see you." Vanessa Torres. I hadn't seen her since she'd testified at the trial. "Send her in." Vanessa looked different, older, somehow more serious. She sat down carefully. "Mrs. Clark, I know I have no right to ask anything from you, but I wanted you to know I've started paying back the taxes I owe. It'll take years, but I'm working 3 jobs to make it happen." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I needed you to know I take responsibility for my part in this. Richard lied to me, but I chose to believe him because it benefited me. I was stupid and selfish, and I'm sorry." She stood up. "That's all. I just wanted to say that in person." I watched her turn to leave. "Vanessa," she stopped. "There's a small consulting firm downtown that works with women rebuilding their careers after legal troubles. They might have a position open. It won't pay much, but it's honest work." Her eyes filled with tears. "Why would you help me?" "Because you made mistakes, but you own them. That's more than Richard ever did." I handed her a business card. "Tell them I referred you." After she left, I stood at my window overlooking the city. 63 years old, divorced, running a $20 million company, too old to understand business. No, I understood just fine. The end.